Um, so hope you're having a wonderful summit. My name is Ashwin Karpe. I'm here with my colleague Sundar Rajendran. Um, I'm the Enterprise Integration Practice Lead for North America Consulting at Red Hat. And we mostly tackle integration projects, and both Sundar and I are active contributors in the Camel community. I'm a committer on Camel and a PMC at the foundation. Have significant amount of experience in integration software, and we look forward to showing you how a Tibco migration typically takes place when we start to engage with a customer. And we're also going to demo, we showcase a tool that we use to convert a existing Tibco BusinessWorks flow from a 5.x application into a Camel project that then can be used directly by you at that point, hopefully giving you that efficiency in terms of getting a very large investment in Tibco efficiently migrated over to a Camel-based or Fuse-based setup. So just a quick background on Tibco. Most of you here should know Tibco, I'm sure. There are still they're a strong player in the enterprise integration space, have been in the industry for a long time, and one of the products that they had which brought them to the level of expansion that they had in the early 2000s was basically Rendezvous, which was used highly in the financial verticals. They then branched out into EAI, and they branched out into other areas of integration, including JMS-based offerings like EMS. They have a bunch of different products. We're going to restrict ourselves to BusinessWorks today and only talk about BusinessWorks. EMS as well, if you're interested, but we do EMS-based or messaging migrations all the time, so I'm happy to answer any questions there as well. So BusinessWorks is more of a EAI-based integration suite that Tibco introduced in the early 2000s and has been kind of revising over time, and for the most part offered a GUI-based development model, which had designers, which then you could translate that design into some kind of a runnable that would then deploy into containers like Tomcat and so on. So they had a very particular GUI-centric view of the world that essentially allowed you to integrate applications together, mostly through adapters and custom components that they put out, and that was the style. They were also very big on XSL, so all of their transformations usually go through XSL, so it's all XSL centric. They have a schema beneath the 5.x layer, so their design flows, when you persist them on disk, turn into some kind of an XML based data that then essentially is backed by schemas and so on. So they talk mostly in terms of activities and transitions, so their logos typically tend to be activities and the arrows tend to be transitions from one into another. It's like just step-by-step migration of a piece or message along the way. So in many ways they kind of have different terminologies, but they translate pretty well into Camel as well. Some of the common challenges that customers relate to us as to why it is that they care about moving away from Tibco is certainly cost is one large part of it. Vendor lock-in is a very large part of it also. Closed source vendor has been strong in the vertical, but generally does not expose, does not give you the kind of palette that you can actually extend it out to the extent necessary. Customizations typically have to be either worked by their organization or their engineering. They send consulting in to kind of extend those pieces out, but it's not an open API that you're coding against. Other big challenges are, availability of skill sets is another one that customers relate to us because of the vintage, because of the experience level. They've kind of grown into that, but if you lose someone, getting another person with a Tibco background is not as easy. People are moving away more and so that's a big challenge. Product roadmap is another big one where essentially what Tibco is doing is they're morphing towards the container mindset as well. They're starting to port Tibco on Docker. And if you look at their 6.x version of their product, it is a fundamental rewrite of their 5.x version. So it's a complete rewrite. So any customer migrating from 5.x to 6.x is basically now having to rewrite that application into that new product. So that's a big challenge. They're also starting to move towards Docker. They offer Tibco on Docker, but because they don't have committers on Docker, they don't own it end to end. They don't have an ability to influence Docker. They certainly offer a port of their application on Docker is the best way to put that. And lastly, CI/CD support. The CI/CD support, if you look at their 5.x versions, because of the style in which they built it, they had a GUI-based model behind it, which then had their own particular way of driving it. These days they offer integration with Maven, maybe offer integration with Jenkins, but again, it's not like an end-to-end kind of a CI/CD model that they're baking or buying into. And again, the openness of that model is also questionable. So there are several different challenges in that space. So it's starting to look older and older, and forcing a decision on customers to move away from them. So we'll talk about the migration approach first. What is it that we do? What do we bring to the table, and how do we parse this down? And before jumping to the demo, I just want to be sure that you understand how we have a methodology in place, that we're not just kind of going in and saying, yeah, we'll convert everything in one fell swoop. There's a methodology that we follow, and I'm just going to walk that with you. So Red Hat basically is not built out in consulting as we're going to stay there and we're going to keep caring and feeding for it. We're not a consulting organization like an Accenture or whatnot. We typically ensure that you have the ability in-house to care and feed for this over time, and that when we walk away, that you have this ability to take it on. We partner with you. We will have your people work with us along the way and do this in phases, where in the first phase we are doing most of the work. You get to look at how it is that we're doing this, and over time kind of take more and more of those responsibilities away from us and deliver those yourselves. And we use common patterns and tooling, and some of that you're going to see now. We have certain tooling that we offer that is what is a differentiator for us. We're going to show you how we convert an existing schema, an existing flow into a Camel route. So you can already get 30 to 40% of that efficiency. And then the customizations of Tibco are things that we need to kind of work through. But in general, it gets you a portion of the way there. So generally, when we go to customers, each customer's scale at which they employ Tibco software is different. They may have different products, they may have different. We have similar offerings for other Tibco technologies like BRMS and BPM technologies like active spaces and whatnot. And the BPMS team certainly does a lot of that. But we start with a discovery session where we put our arms around the problem. What we try to do in the discovery session is try to get a sense of their current topology, their functional and non-functional requirements, SLAs and QoS needs. Are there multiple data centers involved? What are the HA failover, clustering needs, etc. And then we also look at where do they want to go from here. Now that they've played here and they're taking this opportunity to migrate away, where do they want to really be? And so we have those conversations, and it's usually a day-long session. We break that day into a working periods or timelines that we have some 3 or 4 sessions. Again, the idea is not to kind of force Camel on a customer. It's more to understand, if we were to do this or take it on, what are the choices we would make along the way to ensure that you arrive the other side, and that everybody has a good sense of that. And lastly, we would leave you with a document at the end of the process saying, these are the things we talked about. These are the approaches that we've followed in the past. We showcase our experiences with other customers at the same time, and hopefully you get a good sense of, coming out of it that we know what we're talking about and have done this before. Usually customers then run into, okay, we get it, but have you done this before? We don't believe that you can do this in our use case. Can we pick a complex use case of our own and pass it on to you and say, can we do a paid POC around this? And say, you show me that you can actually take this and take it close to production. So that's one option. And then certainly, if you do think that we have the ability to deliver on this, let's go to a design workshop where we break down the architecture and topology, understand how it is that we can overlay the setups that you have on the Tibco side with setups that we have in order to deliver. So and all of these are basically swim lanes at different layers. So all of the color codes mean something. So the lower color codes are basically infrastructure related. The upper color codes are more and more application specific or infrastructure specific. So we generally do all of our projects through agile methodologies. So that's a common thread through that. We do all of the DevOps stuff that you've heard over the other sessions. We follow the same stuff. Yeah. In terms of delivery, again, after the design workshop, we leave the customer a design document. There's still an out there, so the customer has a opportunity to say, okay, this is what we need, this is how we want to do it. But at the end of the design workshop, we provide level of effort and so on, all those estimates. But if the customer moves forward with us, that's when we start moving towards the pieces or tools and the processes that we've built out to actually drive a existing Tibco customer to the Fuse Island, so kind of move them over in a very specific, particular way. And so we would work that with you. Of course, all of this is a joint effort. We work that with you and slowly start migrating that over. So just one quick thing I'd like to emphasize is that the Tibco migrations run the gamut. And so there are lots of different levels at which we can do this. So, and we've done it with all of the different possibilities, including multiple data centers. They're large customers in the finance vertical, they're in other verticals that have used us. It's really the reason you want to move to something like a Camel is to accomplish this agile integration that allows you to transition into a universe that moves at a much faster pop than you've been used to, and at a velocity that you're comfortable with carrying forward. Okay, that is a challenge that you have today in 5.x, and does not even with 6.x. It's a fundamental rethink. So you have a decision point at this point. Where do you go from here? Now that you have 5.x. Of course, you could go to 6.x, but you have a choice to make, and that's what we're trying to say here. So at this point, I'll let Sundar take over and start doing the demo bits. After that, I'm open to questions. We can have that after the session, or I'm happy to have one-on-ones with you also.
Hey, thank you, Ashwin. Good morning, all. So that's how we kind of start off our assignments with. We have the thing going on. We do come with your demos. So let me quickly shift this. Oh, one moment. Yeah. So typically how we do look at this when we do our consulting assignments with the client is, we walk in, we do have your Tibco applications, which start off with looking a certain way. We start off from there, we look at the Tibco application, walk through each and every process with you, and then from there on, we start migrating them into their own language, Camel's language from Tibco's language. But we're doing this with a couple of clients. We looked at what Tibco actually does and what's this UI you are looking at. At the end of it, if we look at it as Tibco applications, it's basically XML. All Tibco does is takes this XMLs, transforms them into a particular way, puts it out into an UI, how you can actually mark them as transitions, activities, whichever language they call. And in Camel, we call them froms and tos, routes and contexts. So we looked at this and came up with a tool. What the tool does is reads out through this Tibco projects, converts them into a Camel project, brings them out into a way which a Camel expert can understand or a Java person can understand, does not need to know Tibco. So with that said, I'm going to open up a small Tibco application in a Tibco designer just to show how easy or how latest we are going to be. So your Tibco, generally when we open up a Tibco BusinessWorks project, I'm going to start off with a small process which is going to read a file, have an order which has order information in that, invoke a SOAP service, place that order, get an order response back, and then write it out into a file. Pretty simple. So a Tibco process generally looks like this, with a start and an end and transitions in between, and each of these transitions go from an activity to activity. Each of that activity has a specific thing to work out within that particular process. So let me just quickly walk you through this. So start generally is where your process starts, and every Tibco process will have one particular start and one end, and that's about it. And I have an activity which is a read input file activity, has a particular set of parameters on top of it, where it reads the file from, what it does with that, then transforms that into a different XML file, passes it into an input for a SOAP XML for a SOAP service, passes that input from the file into a particular input, which then gets messaged to a SOAP request, invokes a SOAP request, gets the response back from SOAP, then messages the output into a particular format and writes it out into an output file. So typically, this is how a project looks like. So what we do is that we take up this project, look at it for what it is, so at the end of the day, your Tibco project, which we look at it, is going to be this way, where each of the directory has a certain significance. The names could be different, but the file formats are going to be same. The process, this is where we are more of required. And if I open it up, it's nothing but an XML file with a set of schemas and tells me where the transitions are going to be. Each of these transitions are like activities, whichever the read to the file, which I showed just above in the UI, is an activity. So what we do from here, so we did this couple of assignments at clients, and we thought, how do we bring, what value do we bring to the customer? Okay, everybody can read into an XML, look at a Tibco file, write it in a Camel file. So how do we automate this? So that's where we came up with a tool which takes an input into a Tibco project and gives you an output as a nice Camel project with all the resources, your XSLs, XMLs, your WSDLs copied out from your existing projects, your logics copied out, gives you a nice Maven project which we can then just open up and move it along from there on. So once we have that, it's pretty easy to kind of, any developer who is doing a Camel, it's easy to look at the Camel project rather than at a Tibco project. So let me go ahead, run the tool. So this is just a plain Java tool which takes your input as your Tibco project, gives me an output which is a generated project, which is going to be a Camel route with a set of test activities. So that it's generated a project. Now I'm going to go out to Eclipse, open up the project, and just walk you through what exactly it does. So that's where I generated the project demo, latest example gen. So that's my output there. I'm going to open it up. Now this gives me a typical Maven project, a typical Maven Java project, or a Camel project, if you will, and a nice blueprint route, which is a Camel route, along with your transformations, your XSLs, which basically are your Tibco transformations and froms and tos and activities. The transitions which we looked at, they get translated into your XSLs as is, and validations into XSDs. If you have any SOAP services, the WSDLs come out along with their supporting XSDs. All your general constants which are there in your global variables in Tibco get converted into your property value, key value attributes into your property file in the Camel language. I have a log4j. We get into your test cases. Your test cases are auto-generated. And your POM file pulls in out with typical Red Hat's dependencies and other stuff, which we have it. Now, let me quickly open up your Camel context. So this is typically how your Camel route is going to look like from your Tibco transitions. So each of your activities and the transitions in your Tibco is now converted into your Camel routes. So if you look at this route, it's a read input file, transform file. If I have to relate it into Tibco world, go back there, you see a read input activity, you see a transform file activity. Each of these activities are now converted into typical Camel routes, and your transitions, the arrow marks are nothing but your directs from wherever it connects to. So it starts from a read input file, ends calling a transform file, which is a start point of your transform file, though that's your transitions in between. So typically, this is how it's going to look like with all your routes related. Now, this makes it so much easier when you actually have to do this development. I don't have to look at a Tibco route and a Tibco transition anymore, read through the XML files, make sense of all of this. But once I have this Camel route, a developer who is proficient in Camel or even in Java, who doesn't even know Tibco, sits at this route, looks at this route, he has all the resources he needs in the form of XSLs and WSDLs which have been pulled out into the project. You get that moving, and any other transformations which I need to be can be done from here on, which reduces my development time or even my transition time by about 40 to 50%. And in some cases, the transitions could be as is. You can straight away run the project when there is a minimal complexity or there isn't about a lot of looping going around in your Tibco applications, and it's a SOAP service. It's pretty much like straightforward to run these projects out. What the tool does is give you this particular setup where you can start off with, but what you might have to end up doing is rewrite your XSLs a bit, look at your validations a bit here and there, which is typically an XSL, XSD, and a WSDL kind of job rather than being a very complex stuff. So having said that, I'll walk you through the test case. So here, if you look at it, what happens is we showed the Tibco BusinessWorks, which we said there is a start point here, and then there is an endpoint here. Typically in the Camel, what we are trying to do right now is that correlated to the same way in Camel, and we have something called a service start and a service end. So you see this, the service end, and similarly we have service start. Now what we do with the test case is that we kind of write out a test case which starts at the service start and ends at the service end. We send out an input into service start and see typically how we arrive at the end. So let me open up the test case, and so your typical test case now generally is your direct start, which is nothing but the service start which I showed you right now, and we are going to send up a template within an XML file, the order file which I'm going to send it out. It invokes the service, writes it back to the response. So like I said, there is going to be a little bit of work there, not much, where I'm going to copy into the input file what input I'm going to give it to the service. So this is the input I'm providing as an input file. I'm going to run out a test case right out. Let's see what happens. So generally, this is typically how we set up the projects when we don't have anything and we start off with some Camel applications. So it's now starting up the applications with all the necessary dependencies. Run the application, it's a success application, and what we have here is an XML file which has come as an output. So I'm going to paste that into an XML file as I'm doing this. So I have the input which has come in and the output which has gone in. So typically, just to show how similar it is, I'm going to run this tester out for you in Tibco. So it's done. My write to order files has written an output. If you look at the content source, it's written it out to a file here, order number.xml. I'm just going to try and open that up to show you the similarities of what Camel has done for your project. See that? So this accelerates our development cycles with the help of this tool. That the turnaround time from a Tibco project to what you look at into a Camel is going to be pretty close and immediate.
Any questions
Yeah.
at this point? Yes. Oh, hang on.
Oh, 1 minute.
How much of the Tibco palette do you cover? And especially some of the Tibco activities have more advanced features like sequencing keys or spawning child processes.
Yes.
Are these supported in the tooling as well?
So what we do there is, so Sundar, can you bring up pieces? So can you bring up the the camel route?
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. There are things that Tibco has in addition to this is just the basic piece that you're seeing. Yes, that there are complications there. There are things. However, what we do, go down a little bit. Things that it can't handle through automation, we actually then put in things like this. We add comments saying, this catch, this look for catch activity.
Yeah. Yeah, here.
Right. Yeah. There are pieces there that we don't immediately, for example, there are things inside that Tibco has done that are very unique to just what they don't expose that code. It's hidden. So what we have to try and understand at that point is what exactly it is looking to do. So of course this tool is in a certain stage of development. We generally don't try to set the expectation with customers that you're getting something that's going to do some magic here. It's not that. But we can give you an efficiency level there. So if we can give you a 30% out of the gates benefit coming out of it, surely, of course, there are pieces that we are going to have to work through. But if we understand those, there are absolutely, there are ways in which we can accomplish identical things that Tibco has through maybe writing our own custom components, maybe writing a custom processor. Because we have an open API, we can do everything that Tibco has offered you. We just need to understand how that thing behaves, and then we can make that happen. So that's what we've done at customers is we don't presume to know everything that Tibco has done. And certainly if you go walk the 5.x vintage or start walking, this is this version and that's that version, maybe features have become, bugs have become features, or they've kind of, done something more interesting in the next version. So we don't presume to know all of that, but certainly if we understand what gets sent in through log files, what comes out of that thing, we can start to put something in its place that replaces it.
And for example, in Tibco you also have the XPath on the transitions to branch into multiple
Yes.
paths.
So we deal with that. That we deal with. Meaning, because we use the transitions basically then lead into bigger blocks of processes themselves, which themselves have their start and end. We deal with all of that. So those connections do happen, yes.
Is it Java DSL also supported, or are you tied to the OSGI blueprint environment?
Java DSL, we can intersperse that. We don't generate Java. The trouble with doing that is we start to walk into a very slippery place, because you can't just write Java, or we can create stubs. People have done that all along, but we're trying to not. The value of the tool is discardable. Remember, at the end of the day, once you get to Camel land, the tool is of no value in and of itself. It's just an efficiency thing. So in many cases, if we wouldn't hesitate to use brute force if needed, or things like that.
Would you still recommend the tool if you have a team which is highly proficient in Tibco BusinessWorks and also knows Camel quite well?
Oh, then the question becomes, is it helping you in any way, just speeding up the process, or is it creating more work for you? At the moment, it's at a point where it's not going to create too much more work for you. So if your team is already savvy with Camel and understands Tibco BusinessWorks very well, looking at something like this is going to be an easy thing for them. The question is, do I have to then walk in? This is the efficiency bit. Is typically what you'd have to do there is you'd have to kind of go into the Tibco flow and say, that's that, and now I'm writing Camel on the other side. So if you don't use the tool, this is boilerplate stuff. So why would you want to have a highly proficient resource do boilerplate stuff? Hopefully it generates some of this and gives you a starting point somewhere along the way, and then you take it from there, is a better way to go.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, please. Thank you.
So in this example that you showed, you transformed the soap to soap, right? The
Yes.
Soap, the Tibco soap to Camel
Yes.
soap.
Yes.
So what component of Camel, feature are you using in the generated blueprint? So is it what Camel component? Is it Camel CXF?
It's XSL. So Camel supports XSL.
Yeah, no, to make the actual soap call.
Oh, CXF. Yes.
CXF, yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
So it knows which component to pick, right?
Yes. So Sundar, can you bring up the POM file?
Yeah.
So what we do is, because typically one of the benefits of doing this is that we already know what components would be involved. We kind of surmise that based on, there's soap in there, so let's pull.
And you also
I'm not saying that it's perfect, but it's something that gives you a full working project. You can add dependencies all day long, though that's easy enough to do. If you have a particular, Camel has 150 components, Tibco doesn't have that much. There's only very limited number. Because of its vintage, it's much behind the curve in terms of newer things. So Camel, a lot of new components that weren't even envisioned about 10 years ago, it has. So it's an easier curve.
So do you have the option to select the Camel version?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. So in the POM file, for example, if you go in and open up one of these, you see that's the version.
And
You can, depending on what version of Camel you're working with, you can change that.
And one last thing, so the transformations that you're using on the Tibco side, so you converted that to XSL, right? The transformations from
Yes, that's
the
so.
file to the soap.
Yes. So Tibco would have an XSL already written out. We would use that XSL as it's been written out. There are, so I want to say a small word of caution there. There are certain Tibco functions that they have written that are in the XSL that seem to be very custom again. Okay. So those functions we have a good handle on. We also address that on the other side. So we actually have those functions mapped into more traditional XSL. There's a bit of information hiding there, but XSL is expressive enough that if you had to do it using even standard ways, well understood ways of doing it, you'd be able to do it. So we don't try to kind of Tibco-ize anything.
Thank you.
All right.
So if we have a process with many sub-processes and many components that are used in multiple different processes on Tibco side,
Yes.
will this tool be able to help?
Great question. So what we have is we also have baked out a set of infrastructure services, and that's something that we would offer that goes across all of these kind of flows. So for example, I don't know, just timer service, which could be an offering into all of the other services. So these would be multiple flows would use that service. We offer those directly. We've coded a bunch of those as well at customers. Did I answer your question correctly?
Maybe, but into the details. So our service calls sub-process, which calls in the turn other sub-processes, right?
Yes.
And those sub-processes are custom-made.
Yes.
It's our own homegrown, but they're used in different processes.
Yes.
Will this tool be, is it
Yes.
just
It
for
will.
happy paths, or it also goes into
Yeah,
the
no, so long as so they call it an application, right? The application has sub-processes and so on. We deal at the app layer. So essentially, what you're seeing, this one flow, that's not just going to be one. There's going to be more camel routes, but they are going to be all connected into each other, is what you're saying.
and there's a way in Camel to deal with process variables and local variables and
Yes.
pass it in
Yes,
between
yes,
the
yes.
sub-processes, preserve original
This is
values and compare with original values.
Yes. The global variables and global values are certainly propagated through message headers in the message exchanges in Camel.
What is that? Not global variables, process variables that are complex as XML process variables that are complex XML objects, for example.
It does.
Yes. Yes.
So to
Yes.
just show you that, so each of these XMLs at the activities level are converted into process variables, and that's how we have the flow in Tibco, right? So if you go look at the XSLs which are getting generated here, if you see each of them, these are your process variables. This is what you're talking about, right? So each of the activities which have an input and output get mapped out here, and the XSLs which we generate kind of, like I said, right, massaged out from the Tibco world into Camel world, and we have this as parameters, sending in as an input, and that's how we are able to reuse most of the code.
Yeah. But
And
what we're looking to do is more of stay as much from a rewrite as possible. We're trying to reuse as much of what you already have. Yeah.
Checkpoints or gateways. How do you stub that, or how is that handled?
Yeah, we'd have to look at the specific function of how they do gateways. For example, we have gateways, and all of the way we look at some of the stuff that Tibco has done is it's just an integration pattern. It's just a pattern that we are trying to replicate. Most of the patterns are going to be out of the box anyway in Camel. If you look at how many patterns are supported, there's well over 70 different patterns, and we've pretty much whacked that pretty good at so far.
As far as like
So-
an approval process or step process like that,
Yeah.
that you just gotta, I guess, stub that out, or
We would initially stub that out, but once if we know what we're looking at from the get-go, we can even morph the tool to take that and go straight in and put what we know already. And so that becomes, so what happens most times is customers use certain components. We can't, the tool is not designed to be we can't spend our time doing Tibco stuff. We want to spend our time doing Camel. So what we do is, this is an efficiency thing where if you have 30 different applications using that capability, it'd be much easier to kind of put rev the tool to reach that and produce something that makes you a little more efficient across 30 applications in one fell swoop. That's the idea. Cool.
Is this a Red Hat product, or
It's not a product. It's something that we built as in consulting as a tool that aids in moving applications fast. It is open source. You want that tool, we can give it to you. But the thing is, it's got to be part of a project. It is open. Everything Red Hat does is open source. The key is it's a value add. It's not meant to be it can't be a product. We won't spend our time doing this. It's an efficiency thing.
Yeah, just sort of. So, Tibco has its own migration tools.
Yes.
And so the whole thing around this is going to be about cost and risk, right? And so, are you doing anything to help people understand the risk? You know, like do some kind of assessment that could lead to a business case to go forward on Camel versus doing the migration with Tibco to Tibco rather than Tibco to Camel.
Oh, generally, when we go to customers. As I laid out the approach, we start with a discovery session. So we don't go in saying already that we're going to take you exactly where you've played at. There is a difference in tools. So there is going to be you're not getting back your Tibco, you're getting back Camel in its place, or a topology that delivers against what you had in your past, hopefully taking you to a better place than you played. But
Right. But the idea of TBDs that you have all over the place are where your risk is, and so the issue is, it's not a foregone conclusion that discovery is going to lead to adoption of Red Hat or Camel,
right,
because there's
but
a risk assessment that has to go in the middle of that.
sure, but one of the things that the integration space, at least from a Camel perspective, Camel is, if you look at where on the spectrum, Camel is a I mean, I'm biased, but Camel is a more capable offering than what you had with Tibco 5.x, and I say that with comfort because you're looking at a technology that was developed in the 2000s versus something that came out much later, and more importantly, it was open source, and a number of people contributed their ideas and creativity in terms of pattern-based development. So Camel is about patterns. If it's anything, it's about integration patterns. And what we've marked or blocked out is custom things that are opaque to us. And that opaqueness or that opacity or whatever you want to call it, that's what we're trying to call out. But it does not mean that we can't deliver against. We can do everything that Tibco has done. It's just moving bits around at the end of the day, and we've done this at several customers. We just don't know what pieces they've used and what is the value, whether we want to put that in the tool or not. It's just that. We can deliver everything you want. Yep.
So I know we're just talking about BusinessWorks,
Yes.
but what other Tibco tools, like Runtime, Hawk, Active Matrix, all the various offerings?
Can you? Yeah, I can't.
What other products of Tibco can be converted using such a tool? I know we're just talking about
Right.
BusinessWorks here.
Yeah, today we're talking about BusinessWorks, but we have done projects with other Tibco technologies as well. So, for example, we are dealing with a number of customers who've used BPM technologies of Tibco as well. That's a different space, has a different viewpoint. Mostly, so for example, if you were asked, yeah, it's very different. The workflows there are stateful. We typically deal with stateless stuff. They have long-running transactions. This is more like plumbing. There's a world of difference. So tools, we have a tool in the integration side. We don't yet offer a tool on the BPM side, but we offer, and I don't mean to speak, that's a different practice, but I don't mean to speak for them, but they have a particular way of parsing it down as well. So what they do is they have cookbooks that they work with that allow for looking at what is it that thing is looking to do, and try and work it in a very methodical way. Yeah.
So how about basic EMS, right? Usually BusinessWorks, reading and writing from queues, topics, from that sense.
Oh,
Does it?
so that there we are even more capable because we are dealing with JMS technologies, and we've not only done that for Tibco, we've done that with IBM, we've done that with Sonic, we've done it with any number of messaging providers, and so the transitions there or the translations there are pretty much come down to building another island with another provider like ActiveMQ, having bridges, and those are Camel bridges that go back and forth, and then transitioning. You can't just kind of switch this off, switch that on. You have to need to move the workloads over a period of time from one island into another, and then sunset queues and topics on this side, hopefully move the producers and consumers or subscribers over to the other side, and so we do that. I think we're coming to the end of this. I'm happy to answer questions, but we probably need to take that outside and talk about it. Thanks, guys.
Yep.